Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Western Canon Challenge, where we are reading the entirety of the Western Literary Canon out loud. Today we proceed to journal collection number 37, dating from the year 1846. Emerson will turn 43 years old in May of that year, and like most of these, it begins with an editorial sort of biographical update, so I'll read that. No entries are to be found for January and February. Probably there was no time for writing, as Mr. Emerson was giving in Boston the course on representative men, begun in December, and giving the same in Providence and Lowell, with single lectures before many lyceums. Meanwhile, he was arranging for the publication of Carlyle's new Cromwell, and also his previous works in this country, to better advantage. Of this service Carlyle wrote, April 18th, quote, "You have made the best of bargains for me, once again with the freest contempt of trouble on your part, which I cannot sufficiently wonder at." End quote. And that is the end of the editorial note. March 24th, 1846. Why should people make such a matter of leaving this church and going into that? They betray so their want of faith or spiritual perception. The holy principles discredit and accredit all churches alike. God builds his temple in the hearts on the ruins of churches and religions. It is not otherwise with social forms. A or B refuses the tax or some tax with solemnity, but eats and drinks and wears and perspires taxation all day. Let them not hew down the state with axe and gunpowder, but supersede it by irresistible genius. Huddle it aside as ridiculous and obsolete by their quantity of being. Eloquence needs no constable. The fault of Alcott's community is that it has only room for one. Majorities, the argument of fools, the strength of the weak. One should recall what Laertius records as Socrates' opinion of the common people, quote, that it was as if a man should accept against one piece of bad money and accept a great sum of the same. End quote. Oft have I heard and deemed the witness true, whom man delights in, God delights in too. Pons de Capduel. Nature may be cooked into all shapes and not recognized. Mountains and oceans we think we understand. To know the virtue of the soil, we do not taste the loam, but we eat the berries and apples, and to mend the bad world, we do not impeach Polk and Webster, but we supersede them by the Muse. Damades surpassed all when he trusted to nature. Theodore Parker, W. H. Channing, Eliza Wright, James F. Clark, George Ripley, John S. Dwight, Charles Sumner, Parker Pillsbury, J. Elliott Cabot, H. G. O. Blake, John Brown, H. D. Thoreau, A. B. Alcott, R. W. E., Edward Bangs, T. T. Stone, John Weiss. Footnote: this list is probably of persons who might be engaged to lecture in the Concord Lyceum that winter, those in italics being perhaps those who would be first invited. The names indicate how serious was the character of the lectures gladly listened to by learned and simple alike. Improvement, not amusement, was the aim and expectation. As usual, the village contributed its quota of lecturers. John Brown was perhaps the dry goods dealer, a member of one of the old families still represented in the town. The life which we seek is expansion. The actual life, even of the genius or the saint, is obstruction. What a contest between personality and universality. The man listens to Stoic, Epicurean, or Christian, and acknowledges his mistakes. But he was right, and a little afterwards comes a new infusion of his own, and he is triumphantly right again in his own way against the prejudices of the universe. Every person is right, or to make him right needs only more personality. Intellect makes him strange among his housemates. What a dancing jack-o'-lantern is this estimate of our contemporaries. Sometimes I seem to move in a constellation. I think my birth has fallen in the thick of the Milky Way, and again I fancy that the American blight and English narrowness and German defectiveness and French surface have bereaved the time of all worth. In your music, in your speech, in your writing, I am amused by your talents. But in the presence of one capable of serving and expressing an idea, the finest talents become an impertinence. In nature, every creature has a tail. The brain has not yet availed to drop that respectable appendage. How odious is hunger! Well enough in the animal, well in the citizen, but in the ill-starred intellectualist a calamity. He can neither eat nor not eat. If he could eat an oak forest or half a mountain, I should like that. A good curriglue supper for 13, but hunger for any dinner he is likely to get degrades him. If we cannot have a good rider, at least let us have a good horse. Now 'tis a haggard rider of a haggard horse. In Germany there still seems some hidden dreamer from whom this strange, genial, poetic, comprehensive philosophy comes, and from which the English and French get more rumors and fragments, which are yet the best philosophy we know. One, while we thought that this fontal German was Schelling, then Fichte, Novalis, then Oken, then it hovered about Schleiermacher and settled for a time on Hegel. But on producing authenticated books from each of these masters, we find them clever men, but nothing like so great and deep a poet sage as we looked for. And now we are still to seek for the lurking Bayman of modern Germany. Hegel's Philosopheme, blazoned by Cousin, that an idea always conquers, and in all history victory has ever fallen on the right side, a doctrine which Carlyle has as usual found a fine idiom for, that right and might go together, was a specimen of this Teutonism. Something of it there is in Schelling, more in his quoted Mater, something in Goethe, who is Catholic and poetic. Swedenborg had much, Novalis had good sentences, Kant nothing of it. Kepler was a Unitarian of the united world. And then there is a untranslated sentence below. Eloquence wants anthracite coal. Coldness is most fatal quality. Phaedrus horses, one winged, one not, there must be both. Burke had the high principles, and Chatham never a generalization. Burke dragged them down to facts which he never loses sight of. He had a mania, and yet also gives mosaic accounts. You must speak always from higher ground, Webster does. But give us the rare merits of impassivity, of marble texture against which the mob of souls dashing is broken like crockery falling on stone, the endurance which can afford to fail in the popular sense, because it never fails in its own. It knows what it wants and advances today and tomorrow and every day to that which belongs to it. We shall have to describe these arms in detail, though the highest eloquence must combine them all. Curriglew had 17 weapons, and in personal combat was wont to try them all in turn. One should have a great superseding personality. Too much friction in life. The proverb teaches that there is a pound of grindstone to a pound of cheese, but I think there are always many pounds of grindstone to an ounce of cheese. How much arrangement and combination and drudgery to bring about a pleasant hour, to hear an eloquent argument, or a fine poetic reading, or a little superior conversation. What rattle and jingle! How many miles must be ridden! How many woods and meadows, alders, borders, and stone walls must be tediously passed! Nothing is so rare in any man as an act of his own, but then how beautiful it is! What satisfactions in detecting now and then a long relation far over bounds of space and time in two parts of consciousness! Well, that we drop one thing when we grasp another. The least acceleration in our intellectual processes and an increased tenacity would constitute a true paradise. Swedenborg. How strange that he should have persuaded men and drawn a church after him, this enchanter with his mob of dreams. It recalls Defoe and Drelincourt and Mrs. Veal, the circumstantiality of his pictures, the combination of variety and of moonshine, dreams, and the costume of science. The effect of his religion will be denied by his disciples, but inevitable that he leads them away from Calvinism, and under the guise of allegiance to Christianity, supplants both Calvin and Christ. When they awake, they have irrecoverably lost the others, and Swedenborg is not to be found. We lie for the right. We affect a greater hope than we feel. We idealize character. We embellish the story. Genius consists neither in improvising nor in remembering, but in both ever trembles the beam of the balance in nature. Two brains in every man. I see not how a man can walk in a straight line who has ever seen a looking-glass. He acts, and instantly his act is reflected to him by the opinion of men. He cannot keep his eyes off of these dancing images, and that is the death of glory, the death of duty for him. Safer, oh, far safer is the reflection of his form that he finds in zoology, in botany, in chemistry. Anthropomorphize them, 'tis all well and poetical. I cannot hope to make any thorough lights into the caverns of the human consciousness. That were worth the ambitions of angels. No, but only to make special, provincial, local lights? Yes, but we obey the impulse to affirm, and neither you nor I know the value of what we say. Henry Thoreau objected to my quote-unquote Shakespeare, that the eulogy impoverished the race. Shakespeare ought to be praised, as the sun is, so that all shall be rejoiced. That which is divine is to make an entire traverse from deity to dust, and it is indifferent whether it is in a book or in an institution. Oh yes, he may escape from shackles and dungeons, but how shall he get away from his temperament? How from his hereditary sins and infusions? How from the yellow humors through which he must ever see the blue sky and the sun and stars? 60 centuries have squatted and stitched and hemmed to shape and finish for him that strait jacket which he must wear. Nature loves to cross her stalks. A pure blood, Brahmin on Brahmin, marrying in, soon becomes puny and wears out. Some strong Cain son, some black blood must renew and refresh the paler veins of Seth. What a discovery I made one day, that the more I spent, the more I grew, that it was as easy to occupy a large place and do much work as an obscure place to do little, and that in the winter in which I communicated all my results to classes, I was full of new thoughts. Queenie came it over Henry last night when he taxed the new astronomy with the poverty of their new discoveries and showings. Not strange enough. Queenie wished to see with eyes some of those strange things which the telescope reveals, the satellites of Saturn, etc. H. said that strange things might be seen with the naked eye. Yes, said Queenie, but I wish to see some of the things that are not quite so strange. The one good in life is concentration. The one evil is dissipation. The book I read of lately taught that there are two brains in every man, as two eyes, two ears, etc., and that culture consisted in compelling the two to the entertainment of one thought. Immortality. 'Tis a higher thing to confide that it is best we should live than we shall live. And then there is a long French quotation which has no footnote or note who the author is. We frigidly talk of reform until the walls mock us with contempt. It is that of which a man should never speak, but if he have cherished it in his bosom, he should steal to it in the dark as an Indian to his bride. Or a monk should go privily to another monk and say, Lo, we too are of one opinion, and a new light has shined in our hearts. Let us dare to obey it. Bardic sentences, how few! Literature warps away from life, though at first it seems to bind it. If now I should count the English poets who have contributed aught to the Bible of existing England and America, sentences of guidance and consolation, which are still glowing and effective, how few! Milton, Shakespeare, Pope, Burns, Young, Cowper, Wordsworth, what disparity in the names! Yet these are the authors, and Herbert, Johnson, Donne. Is the picture beautiful, and was the man so great? And must so many academies convene to settle the claims of the classic and the romantic schools? So many journeys and measurements, Niebuhr, Mueller, and Sir William Gell, to identify the plain of Troy and tombs of Achilles? He lurks, he hides. He who is success, reality, joy, power, that which constitutes heaven, which reconciles impossibilities, atones for shortcomings, expiates sins, or makes them virtues, buries in oblivion the crowded historical past, sinks religions, philosophies, nations, persons to legends, reverses the scale of opinion, of fame, reduces sciences to opinion, and makes the thought of the moment the key to the universe and the egg of history to come. This is he that shall come, or if he come not, nothing comes. He that disappears on the instant that we go to celebrate him. If we go to burn those that blame our celebration, he appears in them. Hoe and spade, sword and pen, cities, pictures, gardens, laws, Bibles are prized only because they were means he sometimes used. So with astronomy, arithmetic, caste, feudalism. We kiss with devotion these hems of his garment. They crumble to ashes on our lips. Prophecy is not more sacred than is knowledge of the present. Quantum schemus sumus. Do not throw up your thought because you cannot answer objections. Quote, Apollo is a god who defends or destroys according to the nature of the case. End quote. Mueller, page 193. Imagination. There are two powers of the imagination. One, that of knowing the symbolic character of things and treating them as representative, and the other, Elizabeth Hoare thinks, is practically the tenaciousness of an image, cleaving unto it and letting it not go, and by the treatment, demonstrating that this figment of thought is as palpable and objective to the poet as is the ground on which he stands, or the walls of houses about him. And this power appears in Dante and Shakespeare. I should say that the imagination exists by sharing the ethereal currents. Society is trying Fourierism in small pieces. As the Union Protective Store, club houses for the married, boarding and hotels, book clubs, it needs now only that a hotel company should agree to build a palace for 300 families subscribing beforehand to rent suites of apartments for 3 years. Fourier's 17 musical instruments taught him. His musical scale he applied with confidence to every part of nature. Life is the sleep of the soul. As soon as the soul is tired, it looks out for a body, has a bed, enters into a body in the season of dentition, and sleeps 70 years. Nobody is entitled to travel but such as have done their work. Whilst this world is in chaos, we shall not be allowed to leave it. Hymns. There are a great many excellent hymns in use in our Unitarian churches. The best collection in the English language is, no doubt, Dr. Greenwood's, excellent in what he retained, in what he discovered and brought into use again from Cowper, Wesley, and the Moravians, etc., and in what he sunk, as I had hoped, forever. But already the scribaciousness of our ministers has produced a number of pretended new collections. The Plymouth, the Cheshire, etc., all that is good in these they take from Greenwood. I will venture to say you cannot find one good piece in either of them that is not in his. But they have restored or added a great deal of trash. Their collections will pass away, and his judicious book will come into lasting use. The non-resistants go about and persuade good men not to vote, and so paralyze the virtue that is in the Conservative Party. And thus the patriotic vote in the country is swamped in the legion of Patties. But though the non-voting is right in the non-resistants, it is a patch and a pedantry in their converts, not in their system, not a just expression of their state of mind. One of these tenacities, it is no matter where it goes. It gets an education in a shanty, in an alehouse, over a cigar or in a fishing boat, as good as it could find in Germany or in Sais, for the world is unexpectedly rich and everywhere tells the same things. The grasp is much, but not quite all. The juggle of commerce never loses its power to astonish and delight us, namely, the unlooked-for union that cannot but be of things. Byron is no poet. What did he know of the world and its law and lawgiver? What moment had he of that mania which molds history and man in tough circumstances like wax? He had declamation, he had music, juvenile and superficial music. Even this is very rare, and we delight in it so much that Byron has obtained great fame by his fluency in music. It is delicious. All the quote-unquote Hebrew melodies are examples. Quote, warriors and chiefs should the shaft or the sword, end quote. How neat, how clever, how roundly it rolls off the tongue. But what poetry is here! It is the sublime of schoolboy verse. How many volumes of such jingle must we go through before we can be filled, sustained, taught, renewed? The office of poetry, I suppose, was Tertanian, consoling, indemnifying, and of the Uranian, deifying or imparadising. Homer did what he could, and Callimachus, Pindar, and the Greek tragedians, Horace and Persius, Dante was faithful, and Milton, Shakespeare, and Herbert. But how shall I find my heavenly bread in Tennyson, or in Milnes, in Lowell, or in Longfellow? Yet Wordsworth was mindful of the office. Compare the music of Collins. Bubbling runnels joined the sound, and Ben Jonson's Drink to me only with thine eyes, and Herrick and Chapman's Homer with the parlor and piano music of Byron and Scott and Moore. Neat versification without poetry is Cowper's Alexander Selkirk. I am out of humanity's reach. I must finish my journey alone. Never hear the sweet music of speech. I start at the sound of my own. Clever execution, but these are properly college exercises, not manly labors. No wind harp. Then there's an untranslated quotation from Aeschylus' Prometheus. O multitudinous laughter of the ocean billows. Quote, 'Tis not clear, says De Quincey, whether Aeschylus contemplated the laughter as addressing the ear or the eye. End quote. I like man, but not men. Instincts, tendencies, they do no wrong. They are beautiful and may be confided in and obeyed. Though they slay us, let us trust them. Why should eggs and tadpoles talk? All is mere sketch and symptomatic possible or probable for us. We dwellers in tents, we outlines in chalk, we jokes and buffooneries, why should we be talking? Let us have the grace to be abstemious. The etiquette of society should guard and consecrate a poet. He should not be visited nor be shown at dinner tables, too costly to be seen except on high holidays. He should be relieved of visits and trivial correspondence. His time is the time of his nation. Yes, we want a poet, the genuine poet of our time, no parrot and no child. The poets that we praise, or try to, the Brownings, Barretts, Bryants, Tennysons, are all abortive Homers. They at least show tendency, the direction of nature to the star and lyra. Boys still whistle, and every newspaper and girl's album attests the ineradicable appetite for melody. Oh no, we have not done with music, nor must console ourselves with prose poets. We wish the undrawn line of tendency to be drawn for us. Where is the Euclid who can sum up these million errors, and compute the beautiful mean? We do not wish to make believe be instructed. We wish to be ravished, inspired, and taught. Companions. Men of thought who live in the same sphere are poor company for each other. May 1st. I was at Cambridge yesterday to see Everett inaugurated. His political brothers came as if to bring him to the convent door, and to grace with a sort of bitter courtesy his taking of the cowl. It is like the marriage of a girl. Not until the wedding and the departure with her husband does it appear that she has actually and finally changed homes and connections and social caste. Webster I could so willingly have spared on this occasion. Everett was entitled to the entire field, and Webster came who is his evil genius, and has done him incalculable harm by Everett's too much admiration of his iron nature, warped him from his true bias of all these 20 years, and sent him cloud hunting at Washington and London, to the ruin of all solid scholarship, and fatal diversion from the pursuit of his right prizes. It is in vain that Everett makes all these allusions to his public employments. He would fain deceive me and himself. He has never done anything therein, but has been, with whatever praises and titles and votes, a mere dangler and ornamental person. It is in vain for sugar to try to be salt. Well, this Webster must needs come into the house just at the moment when Everett was rising to make his inaugural speech. Of course, the whole genial current of feeling flowing towards him was arrested, and the old titanic earth sun was alone seen. The house shook with new and prolonged applause, and Everett sat down to give free course to the sentiment. He saved himself by immediately saying, "I wish it were in my power to use the authority vested in me, and to say, Ex spectator oratorio in lingua vernacula, from my illustrious friend who has just taken his seat." Everett's grace and propriety were admirable through the day. Nature finished this man. He seems beautifully built, perfectly sound and whole, and eye, voice, hand exactly obey his thought. His quotations are a little trite, but saved by the beautiful modulation and falls of the recitation. The satisfaction of men in this appointment is complete. Boston is contented because he is so creditable, safe, and prudent, and the scholars because he is a scholar, and understands the business. Old Quincy, with all his worth and a sort of violent service he did the college, was a lubber and a grenadier among our clerks. Quincy made an excellent speech, so stupid good, now running his head against a post, now making a capital point. He has mother wit, and great fund of honor and faithful serving, and the faults of his speech increased my respect for his character. The Latin allusions flew all day, and then there are a couple that have footnotes which I will give the translation of. "The sun has set, yet no night follows," said Webster. "When one has been torn away, another golden one is not lacking," said Winthrop. It is so old a fault that we have now acquiesced in it, that the complexion of these Cambridge feasts is not literary, but somewhat bronzed by the colors of Washington and Boston. The aspect is political, the speakers are political, and Cambridge plays a very pale and permitted part in its own halls. A man of letters, who was purely that, would not feel attracted, and would be as much out of place there as at the broker's board. Holmes's poem was a bright sparkle, but Frothingham, Prescott, Longfellow, old Dana Ward, Parker, Hedge, Clark, Judd, the author of Margaret, and whoever else is a lover of letters, were absent or silent. And Everett himself, richly entitled on grounds of scholarship to the chair, used his scholarship only complimentarily. The close of Everett's inaugural discourse was chilling and melancholy. With a coolness indicating absolute skepticism and despair, he deliberately gave himself over to the corpse-cold Unitarianism and immortality of Brattle Street in Boston. Everett's genius is Persian. The poetry of his sermons in his youth, his delight in destiny, The elements, the colors and forms of things, and the mixture he made of physical and metaphysical strongly recalls the genius of Hafitz. People wish to be amused, and therefore like to have the good-natured man, the man of information, the Uncle Isaac whose news is always true, or the poet or the belle come to their houses. But I do not wish to be amused, and the musing persons are bores to me. But if a man speak in public one right and eloquent word, like Gannett's once at some Bible society, or Henry Ware's sometimes, or Lovejoy's lately over Tory's dead body, or disclose the least vestige of character, then it is pathetic to me, and I have a feeling of gratitude that would wash the feet of this benefactor. Hafitz. Hafitz, whom I at first thought was a cross of Anacreon and Horace, I find now to have the best blood of Pindar also in his veins, also of Burns. The mystic labels and tickets one thing or two. The mystic who beholds the flux, yet becomes pragmatist on some one particular of faith, and, what is the mischief, seeks to accredit this new jail because it was builded by him who has demolished so many jails. Is not the mystic like a rogue who comes to an honest man and says, "By your accumulated character you could deal an immense stroke at counterfeiting"? Memory. Memory performs the impossible for man. Prayer. Dr. Alleyn of Duxbury prayed for rain at church. In the afternoon the boys carried umbrellas. Why? Because you prayed for rain. Pooh, boys, we always pray for rain. It's customary. The world, the universe may be reeled off from any idea like a ball of yarn. Thus, if you please, it is all mechanical. The mental phenomena all admit very well of being solved so. Or it is all electrical, or chemical, or moral. Suit yourself. O'Connell, in 1835, denounced Benjamin Disraeli as a humbug of the first magnitude, and wound up by referring to the origin of Disraeli's family. He said he, had no doubt if his genealogy were traced, it would be found that he was the true heir at law of the impenitent thief who atoned for his crimes on the cross. Double the dose. The pale faces, we are tired of asking for a great man, and now ask for a great deal of a man somewhat satisfying. Bonaparte, Webster, even Captor Renders. We must have a success. It is not we that are in fault for not being convinced, but you that cannot convince us. You should mold us and wind us round your finger, so pliant and willing as we offer ourselves. We know you are in the right. We are already half convinced. You should take the ground from under us if you had a sliver of steel. Not only neutralize our opposition, that is a small thing, but convert us into fiery apostles and publishers of your wisdom. Good powder, but not a heavy charge enough. The muse demands real sacrifices, I wrote. You cannot be poet and a paterfamilias and a militia captain. What pity that the mother and child cannot change states. The child is always awake, and the mother is always asleep. Raphael found the material sufficiently ready, and had all his heat for the main work, so Shakespeare. Michelangelo's designs teach us how near to creation we are. This man is of the Creator that made and makes men. How much of the original craft yet remains in him, and he a man. Art acquaints us with the wonderful translations of the same thought into several languages of drawing, of sculpture, of music, of poetry, of architecture, still further into scenery, into animals that express it or harmonize with it, and lastly into human form and character. Bring any club or company of intelligent men together again, after 10 years, and if the presence of some penetrating and calming genius could dispose them all to recollection and frankness, what a confession of insanities would come up. The best is accessible, is cheap. Every man cannot get land or jewels, but every man can get what land and money and rank are valued for, namely, substantial manhood, thoughts self-realizing and prophetic of the farthest future, thoughts of which poetry and music are the necessary expression. When summer opens, I see how fast it matures, and fear it will be short. But after the heats of July and August, I am reconciled like one who has had his swing to the cool of autumn. So will it be with the coming of death. A good invention was the individual or differential. Here are all the members of my body. How they use and rely on each other, trust each other beyond all fables of friendship, and yet without love of each other. Well, so live two young brothers or sisters, and have no good of their intimacy and use, because they know it not. Love never forgets the differential. Quote, I will get you to mow this piece of grass for me, says the prudent mechanic. Quote, for I can earn more in the shop. And the poet replies in the same wisdom on a higher plane to those who beg him to come in to the aid of the disturbed institutions. Quote, I can best help them by going on with the creation of my own. I am a sad bungler at laws, being afflicted with a certain inconsecutiveness of thought, impertinent association, and extreme skepticism, but I recover my eyesight and spirits in solitude. Costume. We must accept without criticism or modification the costume of our times, and be glad we have one care less on our hands: dress, money, language, railroads, taxation, and the civilization generally. The custom of the country will do so much for us. Let it, and be thankful. All the material is vanquished to your hand. Now for the triumphs of the spiritual. Immortality. Is my future related to my present only as my present to my past? Say they all. The universe suffers no detriment. But for Cebes and Simmias, we wish to be certified that these dear Johns and Henrys, Annes and Marias shall keep the traits that are most their own, and make them dear. Anything that Goethe said, another might attain to say, but the profusion of sayings, every one of which is good and striking, no man. In these days we rather incline to sniff at men of talent and at achievements, as if the artists cost too much. But when a man can do so many things, when achievement amounts to such a prodigious sum, it grows respectable. Yet the autobiography looks today like a storm of gold-headed canes, and Ellery perceived the snuff-box. Men quarrel with your rhetoric. Society chokes with a trope like a child with a croup. They much prefer Mr. Prose and Mr. Horace's crows to the dangerous conversation of Gabriel and the Archangel Michael, perverting all rules and bounding continually from earth to heaven. We shall one day talk with the central man, and see again in the varying plays of his features all the features which have characterized our darlings, and stamped themselves in fire on the heart. Then, as the discourse rises out of the domestic and personal, and his countenance waxes grave and great, we shall fancy that we talk with Socrates, and behold his countenance. Then the discourse changes, and the man, and we see the face and hear the tones of Shakespeare, the body and the soul of Shakespeare living and speaking with us, only that Shakespeare seems below us. A change again, and the countenance of our companion is youthful and beardless. He talks of form and color and the riches of design. It is the face of the painter Raphael that confronts us with the visage of a girl, and the easy audacity of a creator. In a moment it was Michelangelo, then Dante, afterwards it was the Saint Jesus, and the immensities of moral truth and power embosomed us. And so it appears that these great secular personalities were only expressions of his face chasing each other like the rack of clouds. Then all will subside, and I find myself alone. I dreamed and did not know my dreams. Thine and mine. Be the condition what it may, you must support it, and by resources native or constitutional to you. Mob. The boys kick and stamp for a noise when Abby Kelly and Stephen Foster speak, not for any good reason, but because it is understood that people are to yell and throw eggs when the Fosters speak. 'Tis a regular holiday for the boys throughout the land when these people go by, and if they do not make the noise, who will? You cannot allow too much for the levity of men. Inconceivable is the levity of men. Everybody overrates their character. They have no meaning, they have heels, they wish to feel them, and it is the charm of noise versus the charm of eloquence. Individual. The same thing which happens to us would happen to the gods also, for if you come into the sweets of personality, you must accept its adamantine limitations. The Whigs have only for their system the negative defense that they maintain it until something really good appears. First come, first served, said the world to the Whig. Quote, "A new commandment," archly said the Muse, "thou shalt not preach my dismal one." Alcott and Edward Taylor resemble each other in the incredibility of their statement of facts. One is the fool of his idea, the other of his fancy. When Alcott wrote from England that he was bringing home Wright and Lane, I wrote him a letter which I required him to show them, saying that they might safely trust his theories, but that they should put no trust whatever in his statement of facts. When they all arrived here, he and his victims, I asked them if he showed them that letter. They answered that he did, so I was clear. We manage well enough with the elements, but when the elements become men, not so well. For they are no longer pure, but have such quantities of alloy as to make them of questionable use. You cannot extract sunbeams from cucumbers, but there is more cabbage than sunlight, and phosphate from cows, but the chemical phosphate is better. The New Man. Neither Herodotus nor Hume had told the story as he knows it. None of the arts, no politics, no extant religion, no newspaper, no social circle or private friend quite represents him. Alfonso of Castile, it is too plain, was not consulted, might have given good advice. I see nothing for it but that yet his opportunity and theatre should once for all be expanded to his broad wish. Let him make a little solar system of his own. Let him play all the parts and sing all the songs. Don't bore him with your old France and Egypt, with Homer and Shakespeare any longer. His duties are to omit and omit, to show you the back of his hands, to do nothing as you would have him. His prudence is a new prudence, his charity a new kind, his temperance original, his whole wealth of virtues are undescribed varieties. Where's the genius, charm, or stature in our crowded highway shown? Show me thy face, dear nature, that I may forget my own. Editor's note. The following is a translation from Hafitz, whose poems Mr. Emerson came at through the medium of von Hammer Purgstall. End note. Come, let us strew roses and pour wine in the cup, break up the roof of heaven and throw it into new forms. So soon the army of cares shed the blood of the true, so will I with the cup-bearer shatter the building of woe. We will rose water in wine cups pour, and sugar in the censer full of musk smell throw. Thy harping is lovely, O play sweet airs, that we may sing songs and shake our heads. Bring, east wind, the dust of the body to that great Lord, that we also may cast our eyes on his beauty. The noblest chemistry. Sunshine from cucumbers. Here was a man who has occupied himself in a nobler chemistry of extracting honor from scamps, temperance from sots, energy from beggars, justice from thieves, benevolence from misers. He knew there was a sunshine under those moping, churlish brows, elegance of manners hidden in the peasant, heart-warming expansion, grand surprises of sentiment in these unchallenged, uncultivated men, and he persevered against all repulses until he drew it forth. Now his orphans are educated, his boors are polished, his palaces built, his pictures, statues, conservatories, chapels adorn them. He stands there prince among his peers, prince among princes. The sunshine is out and all flowing abroad over the world. Poetaster. No man deserves a patron until first he has been his own. What do you bring us slipshod's verses for? No occasional delicacy of expression or music of rhythm can atone for stupidities. Here are lame verses, false rhymes, absurd images which you indulge yourself in, which is as if a handsome person should come into a company with foul hands or face. Read Collins. Collins would have cut his hand off before he would have left from a weak self-esteem a shabby line in his ode. Rotation. The lesson of life lately is a pretty rapid rotation of friends. At the funeral of Tory, it seems almost too late to say anything for freedom. The battle is already won. You are a superserviceable echo. Yet when you come out and see the apathy and incredulity, the wood and the stone of the people, their supple neck, their appetite for pineapple and ice cream. Singular credulity, which no experience will cure us of, that another man has seen or may see somewhat more than we have of the primary facts, as for example of the continuity of the individual, and eye for eye, object for object, their experience is invariably identical in a million individuals. In practical faculty there is great difference. No education can bring the grenadier to combine like Bonaparte, but familiarity with a seer will accustom the dullest swain to contemplate the moral verities and the laws of life. It will not do to diminish personal responsibility. Do not give money and teach the man to expect it. Do not give him a Bible or a genius to think for him. Break no springs. Make no cripples and paupers. The Indians and the old monks choose their dwelling place for beauty of scenery. The Indians have a right to exist in this world. They are, like Monadnock and the ocean, a part of it, and fit the other parts, as Monadnock and the sea, which they understand and live with so well as a rider his horse. The teamster, the farmer, are jocund and hardy, and stand on their legs, but the women are demure and subdued as Shaker women, and if you see them out of doors, look as Henry Thoreau said, quote, as if they were going for the doctor, end quote. Has our Christianity saddled and bridled us? There never was an eloquence. It is a fabulous power, as I have said, concerning which men are credulous, because there is in them all a tantalizing picture, which they would fain verify on some personal history of Chatham or Demosthenes. Whoso essays to speak in a public assembly is conscious instantly of this lambent flame, enlarging, elongating, contracting to a point, a zodiacal light, a jack-o'-lantern evanescent, refusing to be an instrument. Ah, could he confine that lambent fire? Once manage to catch and confine that wildfire, confine and direct it in a blowpipe, he would melt or explode the planet. There is no despotism like this clutching with one strong hand the master nerve which carries all the pulsations from the brain to the heart of humanity. Bust of Demosthenes, a face of ropes, all cord and tendon. America. John Randolph is somebody, and Andrew Jackson, and John Quincy Adams, and Daniel Webster. This is the end of part 1 of Emerson's journal collection number 37, dating from the year 1846, when the author was 43 years old. Thank you for listening.